Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. All right, and today's guest is Jon LoDuca. Hi, Jon.
Hi, Addie. It's so good to see you. I've been looking forward to our talk.
Yeah, great to see you too. Well, we're going to have a great talk today. We're actually going to talk about wisdom as the organization's greatest asset. And we're going to talk about knowledge transfer, and we're going to talk about best practices on how to do that. But first, let me give a little bit of your bio so our listeners will know what a treat it is to have you here today and to actually talk about those subjects, because you are such a subject expert in that, right? So, and why? Because you are the founder of PlaybookBuilder, which is an incredible knowledge management platform that is loved by many entrepreneurs all across US, of course, Canada, where you are from originally, UK, Australia, and I'm sure it's also going to get spread in other countries around the world, because it's so important to have a knowledge management platform. And we'll talk more about that. But then you also have the experience of actually documenting and creating the processes and procedures with your previous company, the Wisdom Link, where you were trusted by strategic coach as their go-to person to actually extract the knowledge and the wisdom for so many entrepreneurs. And then before that, you were a serial entrepreneur. So I'm going to let you actually tell a little bit of your story, because I know you're originally from Canada, then you moved to San Diego, and now you're in Michigan. So let's hear your story.
Okay. Well, I have to start, however, by telling you that I've been on holiday for a couple of weeks, which is great. I'm fresh as a daisy and was so excited to talk with you. But during that time, I stole a few minutes to listen to your podcast and go back into the archives. And I just have to acknowledge what you're doing here and how valuable and powerful it is. The breadth of knowledge, all these people that you've found, and this thread of talking about process. It's always been such a boring topic, but it really isn't boring, right? I mean, it's freedom. It's the key to unlock great growth and a lifestyle and to elevate the people on the team. I mean, there's just so many virtues of tackling this. And I just wanted to credit you with putting something together that's just so well done and so cool. Just before I start blathering about myself.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And the word freedom is so true. I just interviewed last week Jeff Hunter, and he was talking about, he calls SOPs the freedom recipe, which I love that one. I think I'm going to steal that one, because it is a freedom recipe. Not just SOPs, but any processes and any procedures that you create are your freedom recipes, because then you could duplicate yourself. So thank you for that.
That's right. All right. Well, I'll just share. So I was born in Canada, grew up in San Diego, and found myself in the Silicon Valley during sort of the .com scene in the early 90s, and built a .com, sold it, and moved out to, of all places, Ann Arbor, Michigan. Not exactly like a renowned tech hub, but I found a little .com out there. I was like in my 20s. I was employee number, I think 12. And we were just a little firm. We built an electronic bill payment and presentment software, and Bluegill did really well. We sold it for $250 million in 98 to check free. They own like PayPal and companies like that. This was right before the bubble burst. And I got to just see this remarkable culture, just this incredible knowledge sharing at the light speed environment. And it really left a mark on me, and it sort of forged a lot of my perspective. After that, I got married, moved to Chicago, and started a business called the Wisdom Link, which is an intellectual capital development firm. So its mandate was to harvest and package intellectual property out of the heads of really successful entrepreneurs. And I was blessed to meet a phenomenal entrepreneur really early on in that equation. His name was Jon LoDuca, and LoDuca was running the Northeast for Lincoln Financial. And he hired me to basically help him create his practice management consulting platform. And so we built that for Jon, and then they tapped him to run all of Lincoln. And we became minor celebrities in the wealth management and insurance space. And, I didn't know anything about that world, but I was learning from my clients, as you do as well. Like you're just in there learning, listening, asking questions. And it's a delight to just be exposed to stuff you have, no prior knowledge of. We got onto Dan Sullivan's radar. And Sullivan elected to make the Wisdom Link the go-to team for all of their clients to do unique process. And so sent us, oh my gosh, close to 500 of their clients over 20 years. And so we just did a ton of process work, just digging, through the brains of these top 0.25% income earners and helping them to, my passion, what gets me out of bed in the morning, as your listeners are wondering, like, who is this guy? My big passion is to unleash entrepreneurs and their teams. Like I would go into some environment where good things are going on. They've cracked the code in Nebraska or in Iowa or something, and they figured it out, but no processes, no scale, no liquidity event, no acquisitional growth. It's just kind of we're only as smart as the people on the team right now are able to hold the place together. And so my passion was
stop right there and ask a question because I'm curious. Can I ask a question here? I'm just really curious. You've seen it, you've done it, right? And it's so, of course, for me, it's very exciting to have this conversation. What you said, no processes, no scale. I know that. I think many of our listeners know that, but some of them are not 100% convinced. So
right.
Why? Let's talk about why is it that if there are no processes, the business really and truly cannot scale?
Right. You had Cindy Free on last week, and I really enjoyed that. That podcast was excellent. She's very sharp. She did say something, however, that I disagreed with. It was this idea that we should pull the emotion out of the process work. And actually, I found the opposite to be true, that capturing the passions and insights and perspectives of businesses and their leaders and the subject matter experts inside of them all the way down through the organization is where culture lives. And so you can't get to scale unless you can actually capture the magic. You can have an operations manual, but it's not going to walk and talk. And so you're going to lose a lot in translation. And that's what most companies find is, everything's working along just fine. They've got 50 people, but when they go to 5,000, the telephone game has destroyed what made them great. It's become bureaucratic, it's become procedural, and no one remembers the why. And that's the missing piece. Do you remember Pine and Gilmore's book, The Experience Economy?
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, you're going to love that book. You have to read that book.
I'm going to write it down right now, and I'm going to get it and read it. Yes.
It's an old one, but it's a goodie. They really talk about this evolution of going from commodities like coffee beans that you collect to goods, which is another form of economy, right? You've got packaged coffee beans you buy to service. And prior to Starbucks, you'd pay $1.10 for a cup of coffee at Denny's, and the delivery would be the upcharge. So you're increasing how much you charge. Starbucks comes along and they're not selling a product or even a service anymore. They created a new category called unique experience. And unique experience is where, basically you don't have any competition. You're not constrained by conventions or by pricing. So all of a sudden you've got people all over the country, all over the world now, ordering $4 or $5 coffees in Italian. And in an environment that, looks and feels like an Italian bistro, that was a big jump. Starbucks was, I think, really their show pony for that book. But there are so many other examples. Obviously, Disneyland sells unique experience. I love the Nordstrom story about accepting tires. That's a fantastic story. There's not a process for well, I don't know if you know this story. You know the
Tell me the
legend.
story.
Oh, it's such a great story. So it's 1975, and Nordstrom is expanding all over the U.S., and they end up acquiring a couple of like multi-line stores in Alaska. And in the store in Fairbanks, the co-chairman, 1975, Jon Nordstrom, is on site one morning with the staff because they're just brand spanking new. They've just taken over this organization, rebranded it, restructured it. And in the morning, like right as soon as they open the doors, this little old man walks in carrying a tire. And, Starbucks doesn't sell tires, but the previous company did. Yeah, Nordstrom didn't sell tires, but the previous company did. And this little old man walked in and he said, I bought this tire and it didn't fit my car. And instead of what you'd imagine they would do, which is say, we don't sell tires. There was no plan. There was no playbook. There was no structure for this. But the young sales guy heads up play. He said, do you remember how much you paid for this? And the man said $25. And he opened up the register and he gave him $25.
Wow.
That sort of commander's intent, that understanding culturally, what are we doing here? And how does it matriculate down into policies and procedures? And especially when there isn't one, is sort of the hallmark of this pursuit, this thesis that I've had, that wisdom is what binds an organization together. Wisdom's the glue.
That is so true. And just like now, 50 years later, when you ask me, what do you think the guy in Nordstrom did? I would say probably they will take the tire because that is what I expect from Nordstrom. That's the experience I have when I buy there, when I shop there, right? So it wouldn't even cross my mind that they will tell him to go away because that's not what they do. They're always so accommodating. I mean, and I know that I can buy anything that they will take any returns. They will always, no questions asked.
Yes.
It makes the shopping experience so much just easy, right? So that's interesting. So that really permeates throughout the culture up to today. They didn't lose that.
That's the word. That's the word, is culture. Like that's in the glue of the organization. And so for the longest time, since 2002, I had this thesis that wisdom is your organization's greatest asset and competitive advantage, that wisdom is the glue. And, we talk about our people being our greatest asset. And I'd argue that while your people are extraordinary and valuable, actually it's what they know that is such an asset to your organization. And if they leave or they die or they get sick and out the door goes 25 years of institutional knowledge, we know it can take years to rebuild. And so that asset of their wisdom running around in people's heads typically is unaccounted for. You know this. I mean, they have some sort of, awareness of the best practices, but they haven't been documented. And then in addition to that, all of the coaching that goes along, the mentoring that goes along with it, is where that wisdom exists. That's where all of it actually hangs together and orients around culture. We've definitely been in the situation where we've interviewed people, subject matter experts, somebody low on the totem pole who does the job every day. They're not a senior executive. They're not a part of the marketing team. And you ask them what they do, and what you hear is all of the cultural things. You hear core values. You hear why. You hear the mission statement without it sounding canned. They're living it. It's super exciting to see it.
It's so true.
That's what holds the place together. Go ahead.
It is so true. But here's a question. So what I hear is, let's say we're interviewing a law firm, okay, or a CPA firm. And the head of the firm is the one who is the rainmaker, he's the sales, business development, etc. And I hear this, and I'm sure you heard it as well. What I do cannot be documented, right?
Absolutely.
What I do, business development cannot be systematized, cannot be made into a procedure or a process. Not that I don't disagree, but there is a way of actually documenting and extracting it, right?
Yep.
But, if I had to document how to, let's say, enter payroll into the computer, Okay, so it does need to be done because again, that is like also you can scale without having those SOPs because if the person that does it leaves tomorrow, then the owner or whomever has to go back to doing payroll and they don't know how to do it, and then you don't pay your employees and they quit. It's a big problem. And this is one podcast I did with Dr. Seth Hill where he gives a great story about how after we documented everything, and including his payroll process, when he had to let somebody go, he could immediately get somebody in there to actually continue running payroll without disrupting the organization. So that's an example on the tactical or action of the business. And that's obviously, you go, I can see how you're doing and I'm documenting it, etc. But then when we go into the more esoteric or the more kind of like the X factor, or like you're doing it because you are the entrepreneur and this is your baby, you know how to do it, and maybe you didn't know how to do it, but you stumble across different things, like you said, the secret sauce, somehow you figured it out. How do we extract that out of somebody's head?
Addie, that's such a great question. All right, well, a big answer. The first thing we have to do is reset the construct, and the construct that all of us have is born out of sort of the heritage of business. And if you listeners are out there, play along with me, play along at home, on the left-hand side of your page, draw a triangle. And on the right-hand side, draw a circle. And at the top of that triangle, draw a little stick figure. So this is the classic top-down organizational structure we've all inherited. It's called a corporation. And it was designed to emulate how the military disseminated information. And its origin is even older than, most of us account for. I mean, corporations are really a fairly, reasonably new idea. But this structural dynamic ensued during the 1840s and 50s. The railroad and telegraph companies were spanning west, and they just wasn't a cottage industry anymore. They needed another organizational structure. And so this top-down model was embraced, and we just don't even question it. Most organizations run this way. The problem is, if you're a small shop, if you've got that charismatic rainmaker entrepreneur at the peak of that pyramid, that person has all the wisdom in their head. And it's a bear trap for them, right? It really constrains them. There's no liquidity event. Yep, totally. There's no liquidity event. They can't go on vacation without bringing their cell phone. Their scale is really predicated on their being involved. You may add a layer of management in here, but for small shops who have condensed their management teams, they're flat organizations. And so it's a house of cards, not to mention, this is like a quarterback in football calling the plays to the offensive line. They're not in the huddle having a conversation. It's the quarterback calling the plays. So if you want to be the smartest person in the room, this model works really well. But unfortunately, that's really not a way to grow an enterprise. And so we had to think of a new model and a new construct. And, another consideration is that the world's changed. I mean, dramatically. In just my lifetime, the pace of business, the volume of information, the dynamism of business is just so extraordinary that you've got to have something that's more resilient and more responsive than just this pyramid top-down information flowing downhill. So we said, all right, to your question, Addie, can we make the business around this person? No. And so the model on the right, we took the wisdom out of the head of that person at the top of the pyramid and we made it a central asset. And so you put a little W in the middle of your circle, and that's the intellectual property out of the head of that person, the how and the why. But yeah, that's right. But it grows, Addie, because it stops being like football where the quarterback's calling plays. And when you centralize it, when you give everybody access to that insight, that wisdom, those operating systems and processes, then it stops being football and it starts looking a lot more like basketball, where the play unfolds, everybody touches the ball, and they basically enhance that wisdom asset by everyone's contribution. This becomes a team of us. Not just we work for this person or we work for this company, we're building the business. And so our collective wisdom, our ideas, our passions, our best practices become the framework for growing the organization. And then if there needs to be changes or if there are shocks to the economy, this is a group that's bound around those constructs and they can pivot, they can adjust. And so Yeah, I've seen it. I've absolutely been in the room. I mean, a lot of my clients were highly commoditized service businesses. They were selling the invisible, and it's all nuance. It's all storytelling. It's not about understanding the product. It's how it's couched. And so a lot of the work that we did, for these professionals and service businesses in particular, was all in creating that exalted, unique experience that would take it out of just being another company doing that service and make it different, make it differentiated. And it was always starting with the entrepreneur and then evolved by the hands of the people brought to the table. And it's just it's a pleasure to see it, because when the team owns it, when the team feels that they're embracing it. EOS is a fantastic example and operating system to make this happen. Right. Because you have an executive leadership team and you've got a basically a body of people accountable for choice making, leadership and execution. It scales. An organization can really grow. The documentation, we looked at it, and I've put a lot of time on whiteboards and mapped a lot of process, as you can imagine I would have. But where it's kind of a knucklehead move. I mean, we were running the Wisdom like we had hundreds of clients. It wasn't until 2009 that I realized I'm a knucklehead. We should be filming these people. I think I said that to you when we met. Yep. I was like, oh my gosh, like, it's the story, stupid. Like, I get the step-by-step operating system out of somebody who sells for a living, or who connects with people in a customer service capacity, or is an internal entrepreneur for a business. So much of what makes them successful isn't what they do, it's why they do it. And it comes through with stories. And so we started interviewing them on camera and converting those assets into a digital platform. So you get the why and the how simultaneously. And which is how we like to learn. That's kind of the mainstay. That's where Playbook Builder kind of jumps into process work. Is you take procedures and you add stories, and they come to life.
Wow, that's. I mean, it so resonates with me. It's exactly, it's kind of like we're speaking the same language, but I've been taking notes. Because what you are saying right here is such wisdom. So I want to first of all talk about, again, back to the why. Why do we have to document in order to scale, right? You said, if you're not scaling, you cannot. If you're not document, if you don't have the wisdom, you can't scale. Right. And you mentioned it's basically what I call like the risk mitigation, right? So if there is a recession, the economy takes a turn, whatever happens, yes, you have that knowledge captured. If something happens to the owner, you have the knowledge capture. I mean, I had a new client that just started last week, and they came to me because they just bought a business, and they go, we have an employee 65 years old. And if something happens to that person, then we bought nothing, because we don't know what to do with the business. Right. And also they're doing their own estate planning, and they need continuation. And so that's definitely the risk mitigation. Then you said something that, really resonated with me, which is the entrepreneur selling the invisible. Those are service companies, and they're selling the invisible, because I feel the same. I feel like that sometimes, hey, I'm doing it, but how do I do that? But as I needed to start scaling, I needed to actually figure out what is it that I'm doing and be able to delegate it to my employees, to my team members, right? So we all cooperate and work together, but they understand how I go about it. So I completely understand.
It's so great. It's so great hearing you say that, because that's the deal, right? It's like a hierarchy. You've got data on the bottom, and then you have information, and then you have knowledge, and then it's perfected and refined through experience. It becomes wisdom. And that is the peak of information in an organization. At its highest form is when it is matched with experience and can become a predictive model. You can use it to impact the future. You can say, oh, I've already touched that stove. We don't have to relearn that lesson. We've already figured those things out. We can now command the future better. And I'm passionate about seeing teams own this, because there's something that happens to them when they recognize that each of them plays such a critical part in the business's success. A sense of ownership takes over, and it's a pretty neat thing to see.
Absolutely. So let's take an example like the business development. I'm just going to it because this is like not the struggle, but this is like the biggest opposition that I hear. Like, okay, I'm doing this. I've done business development. Like the business owner will say, I've done business development for 30 years, 20 years. I don't have a method. It can be, it's me, it's my personality, it's my charm, it's my, whatever it is, right? But I know it's not, because we have done many of those projects. So have you, in terms of like, okay, so tell me how you do it, and you're right, the filming is because it's not just, hey, I'm going, like, let's say business development, I'm going to a networking event. So I go to, you don't register, I go to a networking event and, stand there. No, it's like, what do you do?
That's
and
right.
And being able to unfold it and ask those questions, right, of the entrepreneur, when they start thinking, yeah, this is what I do, this is how I do it. This is the methodology of how you do that, right?
That's right.
I always go back to Bob Berg, the Go Giver book, right?
Yes.
I mean, he was able to actually create a process out of how to basically develop your network, right? And how to actually how to do business development organically. But there are 5 principles that he does.
That's
now,
right.
He was able to take that. I mean, he could have just said, well, this is the way I do it. I just like to talk to people and I do this, but I don't really know how I do it. But he was able to extract the exact steps. And that's the fun part in the knowledge extraction, right?
It totally is. And what's so great is most of these folks are unconscious competent, right? They're normalizing excellence every day. And only through provocation does it come out of their mouths why they do what they do. But I was blessed to work with the top 0.25% income earning entrepreneurs across the US, UK, Canada, Australia. These people were 25, 30-year veterans. I had no business teaching them how to do what they do. That was not my place, but I could take it for granted that they knew what they were doing. I could walk right in and go, okay, so you're a flipping expert. There are like 20 people who do as well as you do in this industry. Teach me. And just like a young guy who would come aboard, I would ask all the dumb questions. I would ask all well, why don't you do it this way? And they'd get territorial. They'd start telling me stories and pounding on the table. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is the juice. This is the wisdom that drives choice making. The Nordstrom story, someone getting it, someone understanding what we do at Nordstrom made a heads up decision in a moment when a kid brought an old man brought a tire up, that's getting it. That's getting like the big vision of what the company is trying to accomplish. And you see those types of experiences, and you've probably experienced them yourselves, where someone stepped out of a process because they understood the company's mission. They understood fundamentally what was for sale. I've never, ever met a successful entrepreneur that wasn't fastidious, even maybe a little superstitious about the kinds of things that they do and the reason that they do them. They're very habituated traditionally. And so they follow a certain pattern because it's gotten them a result. That's wisdom. And, they'll riff and share and tell you stories of how they did it wrong, or this one time that, they did something different and this is what happened. And you realize, wow, this is their 20,000 hours. This is a life's work to figure this thing out. But if we could take it like a little ember, blow on it, turn it into a blaze, you could keep the whole company lit that way. It doesn't just live in the head of that person. You talked about risk. Man, I walked into a bowling company that you would know, a big name in the bowling industry. And the week that we were there to meet with these guys, talk about PlaybookBuilder, they'd lost a 54-year industry veteran of the bowling pin industry. Not 54-year-old man. I mean, he'd been in that industry for 54 years. There's no documentation. He just died one day. And it was like, poof, gone. I've seen 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs brought to their knees because their admin is gone for a week and suddenly nobody knows how to transfer a phone call or set up a conference line. It's absurd. Most small businesses don't have the bench strength, so they're at risk for losing key people. Not to mention, golly, it's such a culture war, not a culture war. It's a talent war right now. And so, we're fighting over quality people. And if we can provide a career path for them and real leadership and mentorship and support, there's a higher likelihood not only can you attract them, but you can keep them because they can be successful with you and they can really grow. The most frustrating thing for a young person joining a company is, how long do I have to be like the grunt sitting over here in the corner without access to what's really going on? I want to contribute. I want to participate. Well, the CEO doesn't have time for you. he ought to or she ought to, but they're busy doing other things. And so we have got to kind of meet halfway. It's incumbent upon us as the employer to find a way to bond with that employee. And we like to use digital, to do it. So the Playbook Builder platform does a lot with onboarding new hires because you can tell your stories even before their first day. You can start imprinting on that new hire and touch their heart and get them excited and have them see your vision. That's incredible, especially, during COVID lockdown. You can imagine how valuable, that kind of a resource would be for a company, just to have it all in one place and know that independent of geography, everybody can access it, right? When you do your process work, when you sit down with an entrepreneur, are you interviewing with paper or a whiteboard or recording it? Like, how are you doing it?
Well, recording, basically, it's, if there is any whiteboard, it will be, because we do a lot of the things also virtual, right? Because, in this world, especially after the pandemic, before the pandemic, it was, okay, you have to come and see things. After the pandemic, it's kind of like we got used to this virtual world, and that allows us also to work with clients. We also have clients I don't have one in Canada right now, but we have it US, Australia, UK, all over the US. And especially with professionals, it's not like you need to go and see what is happening. It's all on the computer. So we record all the sessions, we interview, just like you, in terms of we extract the why, because it's not going to be just a dry procedure that anyone can do. And I tell people, if you want somebody to just extract what you do, get a technical writer that will follow you and just do step 1, 2, 3. We bring it to life. Every procedure that we write is different because it basically embodies the culture of that organization. If you want to continue it, right? If the client is not happy with that, then they should actually hire a culture or leadership or coach that will fix that, right? But I always want to see the mission and the vision and the core values so I can, and that is what guide us in the writing throughout, right? Because that is so important. Yes. Exactly what you said. And we record it. We use actually snippets of the video, because some of it, we cut the videos and we add it to the platform, because it is so important that people will actually listen in the person's voice, right? Like the excitement or the not so excitement or whatever it is. Right. So the tone of the speaking, but also there are some explanations. So the way that people say it, that it really cannot be like a dry set of instructions.
Well, sometimes they model, don't they? Like once in a while, we'll get somebody talking and they'll drop into the conversation they had with a prospect or the way they would communicate with a supplier. And you're hearing the actual language that they are accustomed to using. And so you're being mentored while you're listening and understanding what those steps are. You're also hearing that, the inflection, the tone, all the extraordinary. Once we started interviewing people, we realized, oh my gosh, this is the way to do this, because if we can get them chatty on camera, which takes a few minutes because folks get uncomfortable, but once they get over it and they're really just talking to me or whomever was on the team, they'd start sharing and discussing and relating and get lost in their own thoughts and share stories. And it was just like, oh my gosh, this is where the magic lives. Like this is the gold, is all of the in between things. I talk about wisdom, like, dust bunnies underneath the furniture. It's all over the place. It's just unaccounted for. If you can capture, collect it, package it, then it's an asset. We talked about acquisitional growth. I don't see acquisitions typically fail because of deal points. They suffer because of culture matching. Mm-hmm. They suffer because it's 12 months while they're still screwing around trying to figure out which CRM system we're going to use. And people leave. That's why they typically fail, is that the culture can't endure the transition process because there's been no documentation. The company that's acquiring even doesn't know exactly how they want things done. And it just beats the crud out of the team and people flee. So I think that the efforts are very practical. It sounds warm and fuzzy, but it isn't. It's very driven by KPIs and financial goals. Like this is where the juice lives. And anybody who does it for a living knows that. Anybody who's on the front lines knows it's not an operations manual. It's how I say it. It's when I do it, it's my why. Yeah, my story. And I learned a long time ago that many of the top sales guys give their stories to the juniors. Adi, you're going to work, for Playbook Builder, and I'm going to give you my client stories so that you can start developing your own, but in the meanwhile, have something to relate to. But you think about all the values that are laced in that story about what's important and how we handled something and all the rest. It's a phenomenal mentorship tool.
100%. And I love doing that. I tell my clients, especially when we're talking about sales or business development, tell me the stories that you use. Give me examples of how you use that.
Great.
And we capture
So
that.
great.
And that is such an asset to the company, right? And, you asked me about whiteboarding or interviewing. I tell my clients, don't worry about the whiteboard. Yes, it depends on what we are doing. If we are doing an engineering firm that needs the process actually documented, we need a swim lane, we'll do that, right? But we're talking about the more fluid, or the more kind of like it's in people's, the wisdom, and it's in people's head and how they do it. Also, when we do the flow chart, you also need to figure out like what the why behind it for sure. But what my point is that if we are documenting even your interview process, yes, there will be steps for the interview process.
Absolutely.
But what do you say? What do you look for? How do you do that? And what gives you this idea and what gives you that idea? And just have them talk, because and I'm sure the same with you, we already have the experience of knowing what is important, what is not. And I want them to talk. I want them to tell me the story, because I can extract the process out of that. So when they say, going back to when I ask you, okay, what do you do when they ask you? They say, well, this is a business development process, and, it can be documented. Don't worry about it. Just tell me how you do it. I'll figure out a process, right? Because it just that knowledge, that experience. And one of the things, Jon, that you said it, I said as well, I'm not here an expert in making widgets. You make widgets. I'm not an expert. I can't tell you how to do that. I don't, I'm not going to tell you how to, do the taxes or how to litigate, right? I want to hear your story. I want to hear why. I want to hear how, and when I hear what you do, and then I extract it from there. So
I think my ignorance has been a huge asset, honestly, because no biases. I'm not coming in like, I think you will agree with me. You do the same thing. I don't come in and say, you ought to be doing it this way. I go into somebody who's already successful and go, tell me how you do it. And that leaves me open and humble. And, the dynamics are different when you're not kind of in an arm wrestling match with someone who's actually an expert. That dynamic doesn't work very well. I think a lot of consultants get sideways in that regard. I just went in like, I don't know. I didn't even have an insurance policy when I was working with Jon LoDuca. I didn't know how any of it worked. So I asked him the dumbest questions. I asked him questions that a 22-year-old kid coming out of college might ask him, which was marvelous for Jon, because he'd forgotten so much of what he'd learned. By the time I met him, he had kind of moved on, but I brought him right back to like very basic 101 stuff, because that's where I was. I was asking the dumb fundamental questions. Yeah, I love that you do that. I think that's so key. When you're interviewing, do you do it as a collective with a team of people, or one-on-one? How do you like to do it?
It really depends. It depends on the team. I've done both ways. So, yeah, I mean, actually, just even last week, I'm looking at my last week, there will be some that will be like one-on-one. Depends on what we are talking about. If there is, sometimes we divide and conquer, let's say we decide that there are, we figure out that there are like, let's say 20 procedures or 20 processes that we need to document. And we have 5 team members. So what we'll do is I'll interview four at a time. I mean, yeah, great. So we have 5 procedures. So we have 5 team members. So each one will basically will work on 4 of them. And then we collaborate too. So each one will review the other ones and give comments, make comments, yes, or give ideas. So it really depends on the dynamic of the group and what we are trying to achieve. What about you? What is your preference?
It was totally that logic of the pyramid that, we're going to ask the subject matter expert solely. And then when we moved to this other model, we call it a wisdom-driven enterprise. We started to recognize that there were people on the team, either upstream from that person's process or downstream from that person's, that would be grossly impacted by the way it would be done. And we put them in a room together, and exactly the kind of thing you can imagine would happen. They'd go, "You're doing what?" And it would enhance so much and perfect so much on the fly the work that they were doing, because they didn't have the optics into the other person's room. They couldn't see, the other side of the equation. And it develops empathy as well as perfects the process. So it was like almost a weird kind of a team building thing where people respected more what their coworkers were doing or struggling with because they recognized their role in it. It was really neat. I completely commend you for running that, because it's a handful. That's a lot, it's a lot of cats to herd, but it pays dividends. I think it is an easier route.
It totally does. I remember I was doing it with a property management company. So we wrote all the procedures that we need to be, like, we made a list basically of the processes or procedures that needed to be documented, needed to extract the information. We divided, I think there were 17 members, 21, let's say each one of them did 3. Then we had everyone review it beforehand, what, the other 18 that they didn't write. And then we put them in the room together. And we wanted to do it fast, right? We didn't want it to take days and days. So that's why we wanted to have at least something in writing, so then they can disagree or agree on something, right? And that was so fruitful. It was amazing. They became a cohesive group because they understood what each person is doing and how they do that. And together it morphed into this uniform way of doing it, with still the flexibility of doing it their way. So it was perfect. And I agree that collaboration and the review by the leadership team is so important.
So important. I've also seen teams do something that I think is quite extraordinary. Once they've captured, process mapped, and aggregated the best practices for doing what it is that they do, many of them are able to monetize that by licensing it out to their former competitors. We built a payment mechanism on the back end of PlaybookBuilder because I had all these thought leaders that were not only doing the job, but could teach the rest of the industry how to do it. Like you would write a book, they would basically turn it into an operating system that you could plug into in a courseware. And, the opportunities are boundless. We've talked to M&A attorneys and advisors who have confirmed there's a turn on EBITDA, if at least one, if you can document the processes. If you are basically building a business where the leadership is not requisite for results, it's simply worth more. There's just a ton of value in doing the kind of stuff that you do. I appreciate it.
Well, same here. So let's talk about Playbook Builders before we end the podcast. So that is a platform for managing the knowledge. Basically, the knowledge sits there, the documentation, and it's a cloud-based platform. Tell me more about Playbook Builders.
Well, I'll tell you who really uses Playbook Builder and the kinds of problems that they're trying to solve, because I think that matters most. We focused on SMBs, and almost all of our clients that use Playbook Builder are really small business. I mean, we have like the state of Michigan is using Playbook Builder. We have these huge organizations that use it, but majority of them are SMBs. And I'm dealing with the integrator. I'm dealing with the lady in HR. I'm dealing with the operations leader, and they've got a problem. And that problem is, it's not like we don't know how things ought to be done around here. We already know how things ought to be done. We cannot disseminate that information and unify everyone to act on it, to execute on what we've already learned. And it's so frustrating because, they don't have to go outside and hire a consultant to teach them how to sell or how to deliver or manufacture. They already know how to do it. They just need to be able to manage the scaling of that to a larger and larger audience. And COVID really, I think, exacerbated things because people weren't even in the same office together. Right. And so Playbook Builder is built for those needs. It's largely video-based. It is powerful. You can do things like create a QR code in Playbook Builder and print it out and stick it on a physical object, a piece of equipment, a space, a vehicle, a crazy coworker you can't figure out, and you waggle your phone over it, and it'll bring you right to that area of training in the Playbook Builder software. But I'll be honest, we were tracking on the needs of these small businesses. And because I was running a consultancy, because I was embedded in these organizations when we first started Playbook Builder, we realized that sticking stuff in the cloud wasn't solving the problem. And so while Playbook Builder does it really well, it's beautiful. It walks and talks with video as an incredible asset to enhance the operations, the step-by-step components that fit all in Playbook Builder. But so what? If nobody's going to use it, so what? And so we got to work and built a really robust communications suite that you can broadcast out a link to a playbook. You can pre-schedule it. We even built a marketing software inside of Playbook Builder so you can pre-develop your messaging. And Eddie, you can imagine the value. There's an engine on the back end of Playbook Builder that sends out targeted messages based on users' behavior. So it's like you can set it all up and know that your people are going to be touched and reminded. There are triggers in those emails based on the behavior, like somebody hasn't logged in a certain amount of time, or they've completed a certain, step or number of hours or whatever it is that you determine. They get a message from the software. Hey, thanks so much. We're excited about that. Here's your next thing to go and do. So they're like, wow, if people are going to use it, then this is worthwhile. If we're just going to put stuff in the cloud in Dropbox or in SharePoint or sitting up there in Google Docs or all of the above, there's no reason to do it. It's getting people to use it. That's where you drive the KPIs. The other component was the reporting aspect and being able to drill down into how's this community consuming content and which kind of content are they consuming the most and to what extent? And can we measure that? There are quizzes and surveys in Playbook Builder to actually measure, is this employee engaged and are they getting it? Is the reason that they're struggling because they're not plugged in? That's a different management path than if I've got somebody that I can clearly see is diligent, going through all the information and watching all the videos. A lot of my clients use that reporting specifically in the first 90 days. They're still vetting the candidate. And if the candidate's just flaky on learning the basics, watching the videos, learning, what to do and how to do it, it's a sign of where this relationship might lead. And so they use that information, adeptly to drive management choices. So Playbook Builder is really a byproduct of SMB needs. The overwhelmed integrator, the completely, like Shiva HR lady who has a million hats and a million things going on. It's fantastic as a simple, powerful tool to house content. But where we really win is we get people to use it. We drive engagement. And we do that really sort of for the client. And that I think is a most important differentiator because that's not idealism. That's the practical reality of the chaos of running a small business in 2022, the pace of change and all of the stuff that's going on. People don't have time. They've got
I agree. And you just touched on that point that is so important of the making sure it's being followed by all, right? Because we can write, and I always say, that's my line. I can say I can write the most beautiful playbook and it can then accumulate, like one of my clients termed it, electronic dust, right? It's not anymore on the shelf behind you. Okay, that's fine. Right. But it is somewhere on the cloud and you feel, okay, so I wrote it, so what? But now it has to be implemented. It has to be part of your culture, right? Part of the culture will be to refer to that playbook,
that's right,
to use it, to train. And all the systems that you just mentioned are key component of it. You have to know, you have to get those metrics of who used it and who didn't. You have to make it, aesthetically pleasing so people will go there and it looks beautiful and they want to use it, right? But you also have to have a method of broadcasting and communicating and sending any changes and making sure that people use it. So
it's a cultural thing. You said it collects digital dust, and I've often said, if it was a physical document, at least you'd have to step over it to get out of your office. I mean, I've seen people with their operations manuals propping open their office doors. They don't get used, but at least you have to remember that it's there. When things are in the cloud, they're invisible.
That's right.
So if a concerted effort is not made to really drive utilization, it'll get lost in the shuffle. But what's phenomenal is when you do drive engagement, it stops being top down. You start hearing from the team where those gaps are in the playbook and where the processes need to be tightened up and where there are inconsistencies and gaps. Because sometimes we're in the ivory towers and we're creating things and we don't understand how it's going to, the derivative effect down into the organization. But when it bubbles up from the bottom, that's ownership. That's when they're, having their voice heard, and that sense of responsibility to the cause. Boy, that's a transformational experience when you have it all in one place. When you have it all in one place that everyone can, democratically access that information, it becomes a source of pride for that team to invest in perfecting it. It's a really cool transition. It stops being like homework and it starts being like, here's how we are excellent around here. And it becomes another cultural consideration. So yeah, we had to solve it. We had to solve for communication. We had to solve for engagement, or we were, destined for the dustbin of history with a lot of other cloud-based applications. Playbook Builder is continuing to expand. We're rolling out artificial intelligence next year that'll provide relative insights about how you're consuming content on the platform and what are the benchmarks of other industries like yours doing and things like that. It'll be an exciting chapter for us and our growth. Yeah, fun stuff.
Oh, we can talk for hours, but
I know we can.
Amazing. And I have to say thank you to Ben Berman for introducing us, right?
He's such a special guy, and I'm so delighted that he introduced us. I got to be honest with you. I spent 20 something years as an interviewer. I just want to interview you. I was like, oh gosh, there's so much that you're doing that's interesting to me. And all these people that you've pulled together onto this platform, like you're just swimming in it. It's so wonderful. What an asset to your clients and to anybody that hires you, that you've just been, collecting so much wisdom from so many.
Well, thank you so much. I feel the same. That's also your expertise and your knowledge. I mean, just being able to interview you and extract that knowledge is amazing. So we're probably going to have another podcast we're going to do with talking about, we have so much more to talk about just on that subject of knowledge.
I think so.
But for now, Jon, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Me too. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
We need to tell the listeners, we didn't tell them how to find you.
Oh yeah, let's tell the listeners how to find me. And I've got a little. Do you think that your listeners would like a tool or a resource as well?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make this offer. We believe that stories are a company's asset, and we built a tool called a Story Bank. And I'd love to tell you that I was the smart guy who thought of it, but it was actually shared with me by a professional, a client of ours. And the idea is brilliant. It just like Ronald Reagan used to do with his little note cards, writing down jokes and stories. This is a way to basically start collecting those key stories that drive culture. The story of the founding of the business, that's an obvious one. Everybody kind of knows to target that, but there are so many other stories. And if you can capture them, and they usually start popping up in the break room, people, oh yeah, remember that one time. And that is gold. And so this little tool, I'll send it to you. Yes. And please share it with your users. I think that the listeners might get a kick out of that. But I'm easy to find. I'm all over LinkedIn. And of course, the website is easy. It's teamplaybookbuilder.com. So teamplaybookbuilder.com. And anybody that's interested in connecting, I'd happily do a call or conversation with any of your listeners. Fun that we have a common tongue.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the generous offer. So yes, I would definitely, our listeners, viewers, definitely take Jon on it. And I mean, look at the wisdom that you can get. So definitely reach out.
Thanks.
Thank you again, Jon. It was a pleasure having you.
You too. Thank you again.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.